Carlos Sainz takes his first pole and first win in Formula One at Silverstone, of all places. Zhou Guanyu walks away from a phenomenal crash. So does Alex Albon, and Lewis Hamilton returns to the podium for his home Grand Prix. G'day there, my name is James Baldwin, and welcome to another episode of Lakeside Drive's F1 podcast. In this episode, we review the British Grand Prix. And I'm joined by my friend and yours, it's Freya. G'day, mate.
Hello, how are you going?
Doing very well, thank you. It was the best race of the season. I'm just going to say that because it absolutely was. Maybe not from a DR point of view, but from a fan point of view, I just don't think we've had anything better, do you?
I thought it was the most interesting race we've had all season. You know, there were battles from start to finish. You know, we really saw the best of the 2022 cars when you saw those sustained overtakes. We saw strategy questions. We saw mechanics at their best. Absolutely amazing work by Alpine bringing Ocon back to the race. So, yep, I'm putting it up there as the best race so far.
Yeah, it was, look, there's plenty to talk about. And to do that in this episode, we have a very special guest. Richard Saxby from McLaren Applied joins us again. But before we get into talking about that, two things that we need to do. The National Anthem review, and I can say a flyover review as well because it bloody happened this time. It's red arrows out of 10 for me. Fantastic job to the RAF for actually doing it. And how good was the anthem? Fred, I'm not sure if you saw it, but it was electric guitar plus rock plus all of this guy's energy for the Queen.
I thought it was great. No, I really enjoyed it. It brought a bit of an edge to it, I suppose, what can be quite a stiff anthem, and this just completely loosened it up. I was absolutely here for it. Loved it.
Well, let's get into everyone's favourite part of the podcast. It's Tommy T's television broadcast review.
Yeah, thanks, James. It was always going to be a bit of a struggle, this one, wasn't it, with the British being very British as they always are. I think the thing that summed that up the most for me was the piano intro, including the three Brits talking about Britain. It was just way over the top, way too emotional for what is the start of a sporting event. It's just completely unnecessary. You could tell it was important because Laser himself had dressed up and wasn't recycling the same blue shirt that he wears every bloody race weekend. Yeah, that guy has one outfit and he's been rocking it for the last couple of years. What else have we got? Oh, I don't really want to step on it, but that anthem, you're doing way too much. I was expecting to see something like that in America maybe, but yeah, it is what it is. We did get a flyover, which is great, and I'll let you guys talk about that, obviously, because that was outstanding to see for once. I did really respect that the TV director didn't show anything until we were sure that Zhou and Albon were okay, which is exactly what we want and what the drivers have requested in the past as well, so that's really good too. I did want to note, though, once we knew that was fine, it was okay to laugh at how George Russell runs. That guy looks like he's jumping on a trampoline or, I don't know, he's like a very uncoordinated deer, and he needs to sort that out because it looks ridiculous. Does not look athletic compared to what he actually is. And I think finally we need to thank either Ocon or Ferrari for that safety car and then the poor management of how to run that safety car. I think that just led to an outstanding race, and I'm sure you guys are going to have a ripping race review.
Well, that's our favourite part of the podcast done and dusted. But for a better part of the podcast, we are joined by friend of the show. He's from McLaren Applied and many, many other Formula One related things. But most recently, as a spectator at Silverstone, it's Richard Saxby. G'day, mate.
Hello, mate. How are you? Hi, Freya. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really, really great to have you here. And look, the best race of the season, wasn't it? Absolute carnage right in front of your eyes. Luckily, it was, he walked away from it, both he and Alex Albon, which is very, very good. But we had wheel-to-wheel racing all the way to the very end of the race. And if I hear one more person say that old people can't drive, I will direct them to Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton in the closing stages of that race. But mate, what I'd love for you to do is just take us through your experience at Silverstone for the overall experience of your weekend.
Yeah, and thanks. Yeah, and I had a great time this weekend as a punter. You know, as someone who just sort of wanders around the site. Like you say, I had a great grandstand. I was fortunate enough to be at the end of the main straight, so right on Farm Curve where Joe had his accident. But I could see right up to the last corner, and obviously the start finish straight. So it's a really good perspective, and of course you get the perspective of people coming out the pits as well at the same time. So when there was this whole Mercedes stop, to try and beat the Ferraris out. Obviously, you could see it was never going to happen, but it was still, and it also, of course, listening to the crowds on the other side of the circuit. In the last 10 laps, when there was some sort of, position swapping, you could hear something was going on the other side of the circuit because it all of a sudden just raged with that was in Vale, I think. It was in Vale they did the pass. And he was passing around the outside, but this huge roar from the crowd from the other side of the circuit, you could sense that something was going on. And of course, then you flicked to the screen, the big screen that was up there, and you could see why that they were roaring. So, yeah, it was great. And I think I even sort of, exited my seat and I had a good wander around the circuit and seeing these fans. And they're just such wonderful people. And it's such a wonderful vibe. And, we talk about Miami and we talk about Vegas, and there are certain people that want Silverstone to be something like that. But to be honest, this has got its own thing going on. Silverstone has its own thing, and I've never ever seen it so busy in my entire career.
It's interesting. You mentioned obviously your entire career, which is substantial in Formula One, and you've been there through some of the massive kind of accidents that we have seen over the years. What do you think? What are your thoughts when it comes to safety? And obviously, we were reminded of it this weekend, and that crash was right in front of you. I'm pretty sure there's an amazing story there as well. But how much pushback was there from the paddock with developments like the Halo? And how do we tread the line between whether that's regulations and car development, both of them considered, tread the line between driver safety and continuously increasing safety for the sport, but then also, I suppose, what you could describe as kind of racing freedom, so to speak.
I mean, look, there's always that gladiatorial element with how we view sport, right? And which is why I don't think things like robo race might not be, the way forward, because it is all about the human element. We are naturally sort of gladiators. We relish in watching, well, sometimes unfortunate crashes, but it's all about the excitement and the closeness. But in terms of Formula One and its safety, and Formula 2 for that matter, because it happened this weekend with Formula 2.
Yeah. And
right the way through all the formulas that were racing, they have this halo, and I think it's mutually adopted. And do you know what I do remember? I mean, I was fortunate enough to assist in the development of the halo, and I was there when it was being conceived and being sort of compared with the aero screen and all the other stuff. And I remember seeing visual images from the FIA showing them firing this wheel out of a cannon onto the halo and seeing how well it fared, So actually, when you do see images and videos like that, I think you become a little bit more human about this whole sport. And we are making rocket ships. We are in these factories making absolute rocket ships. And yes, the weight is going up on these cars, but that's because the safety enhancements are getting bigger, stiffer, wider, stronger, heavier. And there's a fine balance. And over the years, things like the Halo have added a lot of weight to the car, 9 kilos to the car, and impact structures, front, rear, these massive Xylon panels that are stuck on the side of the chassis, which are almost half an inch thick, these bulletproof sort of paneling around the safety cell. And all of this, of course, was pioneered by Sir Jackie Stewart back in the day, I think, amongst others, Professor Sid Watkins and all these amazing people that brought this up. But, there is the human element to it. And I think most people in teams, just going back to your original question, did we adopt it? Most people in teams would never want anything on their conscience about working for a team that maybe, unfortunately had a quite a serious accident with a driver. It's a horrible feeling to be stood in a debrief, listening to how the driver is in hospital or whether or not he's made it through or whatever, anything like that. It's a horrible, horrible feeling, and I think we adopted it quite quickly because most of us are in that category.
We spoke a couple of months ago now. It's a great interview. If you haven't heard it yet, do go back and find that. You can find the link in the description below. But we've now had 10 rounds of racing this new generation of Formula One car. What was it like being trackside for the first time to see this in action as a punter? And over the course of the race, was your sort of gut feeling that yes, absolutely, the racing is so much better than what we've seen these last 10 years?
Well, yeah, I do actually. I think it's definitely a lot closer, and it's much easier to follow. And certainly the last 10 laps were solidified that rhetoric, because I think, okay, it's difficult at the first stages of the race when people are on different sets of tyres, people are obviously running different upgrades, people are, the gaps between the cars are gaps between the cars. But the last 10 laps, almost like a sprint race, it does show you how quickly they can follow. And those last 10 laps were super, super exciting for me. And that secured my feeling that I think we've come up with something pretty good. For me, the noise is just a little bit quiet, especially when you've got the F2s, which are louder than the Porsche Carrera Cups, which are louder than the F1 cars. And I'm sort of thinking, well, let's just get over that. And you get used to that. But coming into turn one, farm curve, and seeing how planted the cars really are, they are literally on rails. Is so exciting, and they are really close to each other, closer than I've ever seen before, in terms of following, and making moves without DRS, which we saw a few times this weekend, which was great. Again, making moves without DRS. I'm sure we'd all like to not have the DRS effect in some way, shape, or form, unless you're following a certain driver, but. No, it's great. It was really close, and I honestly think the FIA and the guys and some of the aero consultants from the teams have done a great job, actually. And this is the first season of it, so we got more to come, I'm sure.
Speaking of more to come, I think in your interview with Campy and James, you mentioned that there were a few different directions that Mercedes could possibly go in terms of the development of the 2022 car. Based on what we saw this weekend, do you think they've probably honed in on what was making them slow, or are they still too far behind to be a contender? What are your thoughts on the different possibilities that they had in front of them and the decisions that they're making?
Yeah, well, they brought 6 quite massive upgrades to this race. And I think the reason why, I think 8 out of 10 teams brought upgrades to this race. And I think the reason why they brought these upgrades is because Silverstone's a great leveler. Okay, and excuse the pun, it is super smooth. The circuit is super smooth. It's got high-speed corners. It's got low-speed corners. It's a great place to bring your upgrades. And, of course, upgrades are now few and far between because of the cost cap with the bigger teams. So Mercedes saw this as a real benefit. And I don't think they're going to fix everything at Silverstone. But what they did bring along was to try and broaden their understanding of what might be happening and use this event as the baseline to move forward with some of their upgrades. And, let's see which ones work. Let's see which ones don't. But listening to Paddock talk, I still don't think they've got on top of their issues. I think they have said that, you know, one lap it could be great, one lap it could be terrible, and nothing's changed in between. So, you know, they're still struggling with where this thing's switching on and switching off, you know, certainly the porpoising. But they brought front suspension upgrades to try and smooth the airflow down onto the side pods. They brought underfloor mods. The bib was changed. The floor, you know, rear wing trims, so on and so forth. So they brought an extraordinarily amount of. I mean, I think a lot of them are actually all listed by the FIA, but it's one of the biggest ones I've seen for a while. So front suspension, yeah, they've just sort of added some volume to the push rod and the front top wishbone, with, you know, with these fairings and fillets, side pod inlets, floor wedge angles, rear wings, so reprofiled wingtips, a realigned bib, which I mentioned, and lots of local load or stiffness performances to the floor. So it's quite an extensive package, and of course, if you change all of them at once, you know, I guess you struggle to see which ones worked or which ones haven't. So I think this is a nice baseline for Silverstone, and I think they were right to bring as many as they possibly can and correlate them here, and then, you know, see which ones they need to run moving forward. So yeah, but it is a smooth circuit, and that's why 8 out of 10 teams, I think, upgraded for this circuit. But I'm certainly they'll get it. And they certainly made gains in lap time, but so did everyone else, I think. Or they at least closed the gap, maybe a tenth. But Ferrari, you know, again, bringing the upgrades they brought, and Red Bull, again, huge upgrades to this track, with a whole rear engine cover that was so much tighter at the rear end to expose the rear wing. So I think they've made gains in lap time for sure, but whether or not they've solved their problems or whether or not they've closed the gap to Red Bull is still yet to be seen.
We weren't even halfway through the season before this race, and the last time we spoke, Richard, was after the Australian Grand Prix, where Ferrari looked the goods. Red Bull had all kinds of reliability issues, and boy, oh boy, does Formula One turn around very quickly. Max Verstappen himself even said that it felt like he was losing his grip on what would be a consecutive World Drivers' Championship because Charles Leclerc was so fast. And then, of course, in subsequent races, we saw the inverse of that. And then Ferrari power unit issues across customer and the factory team as well. It's one of those things, isn't it, that it's really hard to pick, especially at this point, where we think the season is going. And if what you say is correct in terms of Mercedes pulling it together a little bit as well, it's not too far out of the imagination to see either George Russell or Lewis Hamilton to be a championship contender if Red Bull Racing and Ferrari continue to have issues. We saw it with Max Verstappen's car this weekend, just how one going over a sausage curb can potentially damage the floor, which significantly damages the aero for the car and really slows it down. Unfortunately, not slowing down enough for Mick Schumacher to get past, but certainly from the very front of the grid point of view, it's interesting to see how it is. Let's talk a little bit about qualifying now, shall we? Because you were there. You were dry for about 5 minutes beforehand, and then you got probably absolutely soaked. What goes through the minds of the teams? Of course, we know that there's weather radar set up there to see what's coming in. Were they predicting that, or was it a bit of a surprise and having to strap the inters and the wets on instead of the slicks, maybe throwing some people out?
No, I think you can see from the sort of what ended up being a fairly normal grid, you know, as we've seen most of the season, with the exception of Williams, right? With the exception of Williams, because they did a sterling job, but and Latifi did a great job. But I think it was sort of normal business. They knew exactly. They've got full radar systems within the weather app channel, and they know exactly when it's coming, what part of the circuit it's going to be falling on, and they would have been very prepared. They were super prepared. I don't think anybody really was you know, totally unprepared. There's a few people that probably left the pits a bit later than I thought. I mean, certainly the Astons, I'm not too sure why Vettel was so far behind, and consequently he was really sort of angry about not even making it into Q2. So there's some concerns there in terms of operations, maybe about what might be happening there. But he went out really late, and I don't know whether they were hoping for the circuit to create a dry line and then him nip in there at the end. But it's the usual thing where towards the end of a session, if a dry line starts to appear, everyone tries to pile out and cut a lap, But Silverstone's so flat and so vast, and such a mix of corners and speeds that you'll never put together the perfect lap in a wet session or in a damp session, because one circuit's way off the other. So the confidence the driver must be feeling in one corner all of a sudden disappears in another corner. So such a difficult situation to be in. But I think, the teams were all well prepared, and you can see that by the sort of the natural top teams being in the top 10, and the people who weren't so comfortable with their cars as opposed to the weather being in the bottom 10. So I think everyone in the top 10 certainly had their car dialed in, and including Latifi. I mean, considering he's the one who didn't have the upgrades. In fact, you could say he had the downgrades. And and Albon with the upgrades was left in Q3, but so in Q1. But great job by Latifi. I think he was the sort of the outstanding driver of certainly of the top 10. So I was quite pleased with that.
Sorry. I was going to say, I'm not sure I've ever seen so much support for Latifi as I did this weekend, even in Canada. His face was around a bit, obviously being a local star, but it was this weekend that the supporters really came out. And I think for those of us who back Daniel Ricciardo quite wholeheartedly, we're looking for somebody else to get behind, and often that seemed to be Latifi. Just speaking about qualifying, Richard, it was interesting listening to Carlos afterwards when they said P1, and he was quite shocked by that. He said, "Oh, what? I thought we were pretty terrible. That we were not that fast." Do you see that a bit between, thinking of your experience with various drivers, between what they feel in the car and what then actually gets produced when it comes to the results being quite different? We've heard it with Lewis Hamilton, where he thought they were faster and then they turned out to be not very fast, especially in the early part of the season. And Vettel at times saying, "I thought we were way faster," and they just weren't. What's your experience been where just what happens and what they feel just seems to be so different?
Yeah, it's interesting. The teams feel the same thing as well. The teams sometimes get surprised, and I think it's that lowering of expectations. And I think maybe Williams weren't. I mean, there's some great upgrades on one of the cars this year, but it's all about expectations, and I think they certainly weren't expecting to get into Q3 at all. So every time they sort of start to bump up through the order, I guess it's a spur of confidence, and it's a confidence for the driver, and it's confidence levels to the team as well. So you've got to wonder how much speed in qualifying is by your own sort of mental consciousness of expectations. Well, crikey, I'm pretty good at this. I'm gonna crack on. I'm gonna try and push this a little bit further than what I was going to push it before. Who knows? But psychologically, these guys are in a great position to improve mentally as well as mechanically, and the teams are as well. The teams start to sort of trust themselves or trust their decisions, and therefore maybe take a risk. I mean, there's some people who started on hard tyres at the back of the grid, and there are people, as you'll see in certain races, where they'll start on inters or they'll start on slicks when it's could be an inter race. So there's these risks that people start to take because they feel confident in the car, and I think it's a lot to do with confidence. Teams and drivers, even mechanics and engineers as well. I mean, the great thing about Mercedes is, if you have this speak up attitude and sort of, you sort of you got a feeling that, backed up by data and experience, maybe that you could make a change, then yes, speak up. Just let's get it out there. There's no stupid questions. So confidence is massive.
It's a weekend of birthdays. For Seb's birthday, he got to drive Nigel Mansell's Williams, which was absolutely epic, and it was absolutely epic to see Nigel Mansell at Silverstone in a Ferrari hat with the moustache. That was bloody fantastic to see. I was very, very much a big fan of that. Seb had a good time, at least, with that. He still finished in the points as well, which is good for him, but certainly not the birthday that Daniel Ricciardo would have wanted. And it all started in qualifying. He tried to get ahead of Lando Norris mentally by bonking him in the face with a hopper.
Saw that,
He's really pulling all of the tricks out of the bag now, trying to just get on top of Lando. And I'm here for that, to be perfectly honest. Excellent content out of 10, Daniel. The immediate regret face was my favourite. But this confidence thing's an interesting one. We're obviously very Daniel Ricciardo biased on the podcast, which Freya has mentioned, and many people have probably heard my rants about other people's opinions of it. But to talk to someone who isn't Australian, so you can have your British bias, Saxby, if you want. What from your point of view and your experience, what exactly leads into that lack of confidence, and what's going on in that McLaren space, the racing space, to be clear, for Daniel, and what can we expect to see for the rest of the year in your view?
So, funny enough, I've got a post-it note with purely Danny Rick written on it.
There you go.
Right. So, because, with Danny, and I was listening to Mark Webber on the Channel 4. We have a couple of alternative broadcasts over here in the UK, but he wasn't on the game all weekend. He was in the lower half for every single session. So he was in the lower half of P1, P2, P3, qualifying, and second to last in the race, basically. I don't know. I mean, the car is there. I think the car is there because it's under Lando, and the team are right up there with. I can't imagine the team, being any bias towards Lando over Danny, because you've got to look up to someone like Danny's experience and race winning experience that he's got. But for some reason, and again, I've been listening to the past podcasts, that car is just not getting hooked up with that car. He's just got no confidence in that thing, and that's shown in his results. And I don't know what it is. I really don't know what it is. I struggle, and I think Mark Webber was saying that he struggles with trying to understand where Danny's head's at, maybe with that particular car. Maybe it's a case of him not being comfortable in the car, or is he not comfortable, or doesn't he have the confidence to make a setup change different to that of Lando to suit him more? I don't know. I'm struggling, mate. I'm at a loss. But I do have a post-it note in here, just purely headlined with Danny Rick with a massive question mark underneath it, saying that he's in the lower half of P1, P2, P3, Q, and race, and I struggling. Great guy, great driver, certainly one of the best Australian drivers to have graced our screens, and some reason this McLaren's not working for him.
Makes it very tough to watch as an Australian, have to be honest. Makes it slightly easier when Jack Doohan doing stuff in Formula 2 and putting it on the top step with the Australian National Anthem, playing for the very small but very passionate Australian group of people who work around Formula 1. Shout out to Michael Italiano, who was definitely standing there belting out the anthem for that, so at least he had some joy there. Yeah, it's interesting. We'll talk a little bit more about Daniel in a little bit, but as you say, from a qualifying point of view, really, the two surprises for me were Nicholas GOATifi in 10th, but George Russell out of position in 8th, which then ended up contributing really to what happened with Zhou Guanyu. I'd like to talk about Zhou's qualifying, though. This is not the first time that he's outperformed his teammate in Valtteri Bottas, who you've worked with in the past as well. He seems to be having a pretty stellar rookie year by all accounts as a driver, because he's flying under the radar so much so that we hardly even hear it. We talk about him, whereas last year we talked about Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin almost every race because of what was going on for the ridiculousness out at the back. But for Joe's performance, and as someone who wasn't necessarily potentially all that good in Formula 2, we know that Oscar Piastri outperformed him, which is good news, we think, for when Oscar finally gets himself into Nick Latifi's Williams, by all accounts. But for you and the sort of rookies you've seen in your career, where does Joe fit in that mark?
Yeah, Joe, so do you know what? I noticed that as well. Latifi and Joe were seemed to be on the ball this weekend, right the way through, understanding the car right into qualifying. And I go back to my sort of psychological confidence, my sort of, maybe that part of the brain we don't quite understand, and we don't quite understand its spiritual nature. But, Joe's parents were there this weekend for the first time, I think, ever, or maybe in a couple of years.
Oh.
And, or he hadn't seen them in a couple of years because of the pandemic. There was something around this which sort of really spurred him on. And, he was such a bright face, even after that huge accident. He still had a smile on his face. He still had this confidence. He still had this, thankfulness around him. And, maybe it was that, raise of emotions and confidence that maybe his parents were there that he did do that. And I think it's so important. I can't imagine his parents seeing the accident at all, but it's something that, as a parent myself, I certainly wouldn't want to wish to see. But I think having them there may have helped him certainly, recover or want to recover faster, to show them that he's okay. And but also I think it helped him through the qualifying sessions, as well as his team also buoyed up by the fact that he's buoyed up. He's feeling probably a great sense of euphoria that his parents are there to see him. Who knows? I sort of do, after all these years, I do tend to see these, and it was an Australian driver who taught me this. This sense of confidence. There's a guy called Marcus Marshall, who used to race IndyCar, but he raced F3 over here, and it was that level of let's give it a go. I feel the car's good. Let's give it a go. And I think he went out on slicks when it was a wet race, and there was no rules in them days that you had to start on wet. And he won the race, his first ever race in Formula 3, and he won it. And his parents were there that day, right? His parents were there. They'd flown over from Australia, and it's the first time they'd seen him race in Europe. And there was all these. Anyway, it was banging on a bit about that, but I think interesting about Joe this weekend. I rate him. I can't rate him from a rookie perspective. He's one of the good rookies, but of course we've had some really good rookies over the years. Kobayashi was always considered to be really hungry for it, and had a great first half of the season when he first came in, and he was sort of like, wow, this guy's gonna make waves. So I've seen them come. I think they need to do more than one season to sort of make their mark.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying. Yeah, what you're saying about the confidence factor, and I suppose the brain and things like that. And what I see as a difference between the way Joe conducts himself in comparison to some other rookies is a difference between confidence and ego, or any sense of entitlement. And I think when you have confidence and you back yourself and you have that attitude, you actually have much more of an opportunity than if you have the ego to go with it, because that doesn't guarantee results, for one. But it's also that self-reflection as well. If you're confident but don't have the ego, you create space for self-reflection, performance, and constant improvement. Whereas if you're not willing to do that kind of self-reflection after a qualifying, after a race, after a practice session, training, whatever it might be, and you're purely driven by that ego, I think the potential for improvement is not there. And like you said, it's that quiet confidence as opposed to any sort of entitlement that we see in how he goes about himself. and how he goes about his weekends that really allows him to kind of fly under the radar and just do what he needs to do and constantly work on his own performance ultimately and driving. But let's get stuck into the race and what you experienced trackside. If we do just continue talking about Joe, you were very close. Talk us through your experience, Richard, as we entered that incident in lap 1.
Yeah, it all happened ridiculously quickly. I mean, the energy, that's what always surprises me in these accidents. This wasn't an exit of turn 1 where they're already crossing the line at, 150, 200 Ks. This was standing start energy. And that's what's the surprising thing, is how quickly they can get up to speed with all these other cars around them. And, these reaction times are vital in those situations. And you can, so I saw obviously saw the parade lap, and I had a good countdown to sort of see where, and I saw that George was out of position, and that reminded me about quali and right, what's he got to do to get up there? And all of a sudden, I just saw this Alpha just in the air upside down, and coming towards us, literally coming towards us, and then obviously it hit the roll hoop, and it ground the roll hoop flat. Right? And I knew it would, because we've never tested the roll hoop in that way at all. The roll hoop is for hard impact, bang on the top, flip back over, so on and so forth, but not grinding, because inside that roll hoop is a big titanium piece of metal and shrouded in carbon. And that was just ground down. What was left was the halo. And you could see the sparks then flying off the halo. And then as soon as he hit the gravel, it spun him over, and he cleared the tyre wall, which is regulation height, by the way. He cleared that as because of a very strange nature of the way the car went into the gravel, I think, is the reason why he cleared that. Much like a motorbike when it high sides. He cleared that, and it was a catch fence in front of our grandstand that caught him, which, again, did the great job. But then he fell between the gap of the tyre fence and the tyre wall, the catch fence and the tyre wall. And again, that gap is regulation to allow marshals to pass down, and also to dissipate energy furthermore into the catch fence. So there was nothing wrong with that. I think it was just it was a perfect storm for that to happen. But the energy was just immense, and the scraping sound, because Formula One cars are now naturally quiet. You can hear tyre squeals. I don't know if you've heard it sometimes when they leave the pits. You can hear the tyre squeals as they're leaving.
Yep.
Well, I've never heard that before, since 2014. But you can hear everything going on around you now. So it's not just the impact. It's the hot. All your senses are going, shit, is he okay? Oh my god. And I remember calling us, shouting out to whoever was sat next to me, Johnny Booth, saying, oh my god, he's gonna go. Bang. And then once he'd stopped, I'd seen that George jump out of his car and sort of shake it off, and then run over and sort of jump up and down on the tyre wall, saying it's safe for people to come over. And the marshals did a sterling job. God knows, I don't know if you've seen the photographs of him on his side. God knows how they got him out of there with the halo. But they did, and they did a wonderful job. Stretcher board, I saw his hand move up, so I sort of, I had that sort of slight moment of relief, and then they put his neck brace around him, and they put him on the board, and then sort of wheeled him out. And his hands were on his chest, so I'm pretty sure he was consciously holding them there. And luckily enough, I was with John Booth, who was the owner of Virgin Racing, Marussia F1, and his wife Mary, and they're best friends with Graham Loudon, who was also co-owner of Virgin Racing, but is also Joe's manager. So yeah. John pretty much got straight onto John pretty much got straight onto Graham, and of course I had a bit of an inside line as to how he was, and which was so great to hear that he was okay. But what I did also notice was Alex not getting out of the his car quite quickly, and this was a separate incident. Basically, I think this was sort of a separate incident. It was Gasly that spooked George into hitting Joe, but then in the background there was I think it was a separate incident. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure, but the impact into the pit wall by Albon was pretty massive too, and I think he was dazed sat in the car. So I'm wondering why is he not getting out of the car? Maybe there's a problem with the air system, the electrical system. But it took him a while to get out of the car. But it's good to see them both up and walking. But my gosh, it's one of the biggest ones I've seen.
Yeah, some big incidences.
Live, yeah.
It's interesting that I saw the attention was on Joe, rightly so, because of the epicness of that crash. As you say, Alex Albon, who ended up being flown to hospital properly, whereas Joe stayed at the track for further observations. Yep, was collected by Seb Vettel because Seb didn't see it was Nicholas GOATifi really getting on the brakes to get out of the way of whatever was going on in front of him, which sent Alex spinning around and then got collected by, I think, both Esteban Ocon and Yuki Tsunoda. And there was one moment where his hands went back onto the wheel, you can see, to try and get control again before something else goes wrong. And, of course, he gets hit again. So, bigger impact there, it looked like, for Albon more than Joe, which is mind-boggling to think about, especially as you were standing there. But one of the interesting things for me is, and this is the good Samaritan side of the sport, which doesn't get rewarded according to the FIA, but I'm interested for your thoughts on this. You said you saw George hop out of the car to make sure that he was okay, which was absolutely the right thing to do in terms of a sportsmanship thing. What then followed was quite interesting to me. He was at the car, and then George was suddenly in the pits again, running, and then he was back at the car. I thought I couldn't quite work out what was going on and how the TV director was magically making George be in places where he shouldn't be. But by all accounts, he had said to the trackside marshals, look, don't touch the car, leave it here, because I reckon I can get it started again. It just won't start by itself right now, which means I have no comms to the team. Let me go to the team, work it out, come back again. By the time he'd come back, the low loader was there, the car was on, and per the rules, he's not racing again because he's had assistance. How do you feel about that? I mean, the rules are the rules, except for when the rules are not the rules, if we want to think about last year. How do you feel about that? Because of what George was doing was really the right thing.
Yeah, he was. I think, rules are rules. And, there's a lot of people behind these rulings, and there's reasons behind these rulings, whether they be safety reasons or, sporting reasons. I'm certainly in F1, and when it comes down to safety, there's a reason why the car stopped. The reason why the engine was switched off, and unfortunately that was under racing conditions, and you can't necessarily restart the car again, and off you go. But I applaud what he did. I applaud him get out the car and run over. But like I said, if you start doing that, people will require a push, or people will require get me back to the pits to restart and all that sort of jazz. So I think you've got to put it down to rules. And I think George was actually quite acceptance. He was he was a bit peed off because he'd done a good Samaritan thing and this, that, and the other, and and that's great. But rules are rules, and it's one of those things. And I think he was quite accepting of it.
Yeah, so if we keep moving through the race, obviously we had the restart, and we'll talk about how that affected different teams with everybody going back to their grid positions as we go through our team-by-team analysis. But if we jump forward to, I think it was about lap 12, we had the super smooth synchronised spinning from AlphaTauri. When you see two... Yeah, I worked hard for that.
Good. Should be happy with that.
Yeah, thank you. When you see, though, two teammates racing in that way. And obviously, both of them very diplomatic in their post-race interviews, saying we don't want to talk about it right now, but obviously we do need to talk about it as a team. And we also saw moments between the two Ferrari drivers as well. And we've obviously seen it in plenty of other races, Red Bull in the past, McLaren. What are your thoughts when you see the two teammates side by side? They're both drivers. They both want that track position. And, especially in moments like that where you are true racing as opposed to having the space for team orders, for example, what is the driver, what are they best placed to do? Should they be contacting the team to say, are we racing here? Should they just be racing as they would with any other team? What do you think about that when you get the team by team competition?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I was involved in a team which had one of the biggest rivalries for a long time with Lewis and Nico. And if we take it back to 2016, Barcelona were the only race that they didn't win that year was that race because they took each other out, Where do you sit between that? I mean, you can't have a conversation with the team when you are battling. You are concentrating so hard on trying to find the gap and making a break or making contact or avoiding making contact. And where my take on it is we're all here to race, right? We shouldn't be asking permission whether or not we can race. And I think most teams should just sort of open up and say, look, you're racing. You are absolutely racing. You're racing each other. You're racing, whoever else is on the track. I mean, Sundar was very apologetic. I mean, he openly admitted, that was his error, and it just shows you how close they are. Actually, I actually think they're a pretty good pack. I mean, at the start of the year, I thought Gasly was going to be, the next Red Bull driver, but I honestly think that Sundar is quite a respectful and careful driver. Do I think he's going to win a world championship? Probably not. But racing teammates. It's always that. It's a great debate, isn't it? And it continues to run on for as long as there are teammates within Formula One. I'm a fan of racing. I'm a fan of racing like Mark Webber did and Seb Vettel did back in the day. I'm a big fan of Red Bull allowing their team to do that a lot. I don't think we ever really hear any, apart from obviously the Multi-21 sketch, I don't think we ever hear any major sort of team orders at Red Bull, but you certainly hear it at Ferrari, and we have heard it at Mercedes. But they've got their reasons. And usually it's about maximising the points. But I'm a big fan of race, and that's my opinion. Race hard, race together, race fair.
Well, let's go through our team-by-team analysis now. We're going to start at the very back of the pack, which is very unfortunately Alfa Romeo, because they had a double DNF. Joe, as we've discussed, but Valtteri Bottas suffering an issue that his race engineer had absolutely no idea about. That was on team radio as he pulled in. Don't know what it is, Valtteri. Sorry, I literally have no idea. We'll figure it out later. That's never a good sign. Or something else has gone horribly wrong that no one needs to hear about in the rest of the paddock, I suppose, is the code word. But it's devastating, isn't it, Freya? Because VB seems to be happy at Alfa Romeo. We've said this time and time again. But Joe has been getting the better of him in qualifying and even in some race positions.
Yeah, it's not great to see. As you said, we love seeing VB doing well, and he does seem to really happy at Alfa Romeo. I think it turned out to be a gearbox issue at the end that resulted in that retirement for VB. But do you know what? I think at the start of the season, obviously, we were saying, it's so great seeing VB doing so well, and that just seems to be reflected in his attitude as well. And Joe had a good start to the season, whereas now I think you kind of say, all right, well, Joe's starting to get some race experience under his belt. It's still early days in his career, obviously. But that constant experience and learning is paying off. And as we talked about earlier with Joe, with that confidence that he has, and they're testing the car well in terms of being able to push it to its limits a bit, and it's resulting in some really good racing. So the challenge is kind of there for VB now to to keep up with his younger teammate, and that's a good thing at the end of the day, as long as they maintain that positive team dynamic and they're working together. And as we've mentioned before on the podcast, Joe's in a really good position to learn from someone experienced like VB, who has raced in so many different conditions and has that experience, which you can just be a sponge for if you're open to it. And it certainly seems like he is. So obviously disappointing for them as a weekend, and certainly you would hope that they're able to solve that gearbox issue so that reliability is not a problem for that in any part of the car, and they can come back really strong in Austria.
Richard, we know, well, you know that we love VB. He is an adopted Australian like Russell Crowe, and of course you've spent some time with him when we were together in the UK a couple of weeks ago. You were telling us also about just how excited the Mercedes team were to be hanging out with Tiffany. That's more exciting than Valtteri. Valtteri, put yourself in the bin. Tiffany Cromwell is here, and I loved that story. Big cycling crew in Mercedes, and I imagine around a lot of the F1 paddock, and someone like Tiffany is a great person to spend some time with.
Yeah, she's. I think I said it in an article. I'm quite in awe. She's quite an amazing athlete, actually. And it's great to have such a representation in the garage, because there are some guys in the garage that are, I think Bono's other half, I think she's sort of a pro rider, maybe a semi-pro rider. So there's definitely some good connections in there. I think she races for maybe Cannondale or something like that. But yeah, I mean, there's loads of strong riders in Mercedes. They've got their own group and they go out quite a lot. So yeah, I mean, yeah, to meet someone like that, someone of such high stature in the world of cycling, it's always a great thing. It's always a great thing to have sports people join you. I think there's quite a lot of American football fans when certain American footballers come in, and basketball fans in the States, and yeah, but for her, there's certainly a big following in terms of cycling right way through the grid. I think there's a lot going on at Red Bull as well, and yeah, I think but she's quite an ambassador.
Yeah, it's great. The content is outstanding, and as we've said, VB looks happier at Alpha. Maybe they're trying to get Fred Vasseur to join or to start the Alfa Romeo cycling team. We'll see how that goes for them. Let's move on and talk about AlphaTauri. That Gasly unfortunately having a DNF as well, and Yuki Tsunoda finishing in 14th. It really is an interesting one for this, Richard, because last year we discussed when AlphaTauri was named that when they moved on from Toro Rosso, they were becoming the sister team to Red Bull. That was what was put out. There was no junior team anymore. And certainly last year they were getting results that would indicate that they were sharing some of that information. But this year it seems the opposite. In fact, the gap is widened. Not so much sharing of info going on, and they really are now battling in the mid of that mid-pack, aren't they?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I think, and there may be people out there, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they've actually now decided to do their own car, technically, in terms of aero package. They are fully sort of self-efficient, with a lot of the work being taken on by AlphaTauri themselves, to allow maybe Red Bull to concentrate on things like their powertrain purchase and development. So I think they're very much a little bit more independent than they have been previously, and has that probably put them back a couple of steps? Well, results show that might be the case. Although there is still really good, strong relationships with Pierre Gasly and Red Bull. I'm sure that there is some information and some legal sharing of parts and components. Certainly the powertrain obviously will be. But I think from an aero perspective, I think they've gone their own direction now. They've got their own people. They've got their own chassis designers, their own aero designers. And I'm wondering if that's having an effect. It's going to take some time to get those guys fully up to speed and get that car back up to where it should be, because it really should be up there with the top 4, I think.
Yeah, it was certainly showing the promise last year, as I said. So that's an interesting bit of news to understand. They're going their own direction now. Someone who needs to sort of do a little bit better, and they're trying exceptionally hard, Freya, is Williams. I'm going to call it the Duracell Red Bull, which is because there's no other branding on the bloody car for Williams, and I'm certainly not talking about Lavazza coffee. It's interesting, isn't it, now that we've seen Aston Martin fully send down this path of that Red Bull looks pretty good to me. I reckon we'll just have a crack at drawing that. And now half of the Williams garage is doing the same thing. As Richard said before, though, when it came to qualifying, it didn't matter because Nick Latifi in the downgraded car, Nicholas GOATifi, as everyone in Canada is calling him, was trying his best to undo all of that. But it's interesting, isn't it, to see them make such leaps and sort of gains, or trying to get these gains, but only to one car at a time. And this is looking at cost cap and how expensive it is to bring these upgrades, and to be 100% certain that this is the path they want to take by comparing it exactly to their old car.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the different approaches that the teams are taking when it comes to testing and development. Now, obviously, it's so affected by the cost cap, and you're not going to see as much of that. Let's develop 5 different options and then decide on the day which one to put on. You don't have the budget for that, and so Williams obviously showing one of the ways of going about it when it comes to saying, well, whoever's highest in the championship points, when it gets to the right race for us to bring our upgrades, you get those, which is what Latifi did say happened in terms of it being just decided on championship standings as to who would get those. But of course, when it comes to race performance, it's not what they expected with Albon, obviously, when it comes to his accident, and as he said, very glad to hear that he is okay. But Latifi managing to keep a pretty clean race, and at the end of the day, outperforming both his teammate and having an interesting weekend. Not what they expected to happen. So it's interesting because it does kind of speak to us about the world of Formula One in a lot of ways, where you can say you can have all the best laid plans. You've got an approach and a plan as to whoever's in highest, you're getting the upgrades. That person, is going to have the advantage of the weekend, and then accidents like lap 1 happened, and your strategy's out the window basically. So it does kind of speak to, I suppose, just that constant jeopardy that exists in the sport. But yeah, certainly not what they would expected to have happened this weekend, I would have thought.
Richard, does it come back to confidence again? I mean, the reason that Nick was so fast is because the previous race in Canada qualifying, it was wet too, and he understood the car's setup, and with Albon really changing the whole bloody car, it looked like. There's certainly from the top part, I'm not sure about the floor, but is it that simple when it comes to those mixed conditions? Is we just understand this car better, so setup-wise, it makes more sense for him to be in 10th and Albon to be in 16th. Who knows what could have happened in the race, though? I mean, Alex is a fantastic racer, as we've seen, and potentially there was room for him to get ahead, but is it that mindset again?
Yeah, maybe that Nick could have taken more risks. He has less to lose, on the car. Sometimes having all the upgrades isn't probably the nicest thing to do, because you'll always get it in your ear to sort of say, be a bit careful. This is our only set. We need to we need to try and understand them. So you've got that in the back of your mind. Whereas probably Nick Latifi went out and said, I'm loving this crowd today. They're chanting my name. I think they were singing it. I can remember them singing it actually when we're in the stage.
That's great.
So I went over and had a look at this. Watch all the. Yeah, it's great. So, he's gone in there this weekend. He's got nothing to lose. He's survived wet qualifying. He's got into Q3. What's he got to lose? And I think this weekend is a great testament to maybe, having that level of confidence to sort of say, okay, pressure's not on me this weekend. It's all on Albon to try and make these upgrades work. Right, I'm gonna go out there and give it some. And I think he has. And look, but bear no mistake, I don't think they're really affected by the cost cap as much as anybody else. But I don't think they're really affected too much by the cost cap, Williams, in terms of what they spend. The great thing about Williams is they've got the people, they've got the resource to make 2 sets now for the next race. I think they've probably got enough data to sort of say, yes or no, maybe on some of those upgrades. I think you'll probably see a turnaround. I'm hoping you'll see maybe a consistent Q2 qualification from here on in.
It's interesting, isn't it, looking at Williams and what they're doing now? Jost Capito is a phenomenal leader and manager. He hasn't had really all that much time to manage this team, to put it in the right direction. And we remember the last time Fernando Alonso was in a McLaren alongside Stoffel Van Dorn. That thing was terrible. In fact, Steve Lambert's favorite thing to say about McLaren racing is he was on the car, the worst ever performing McLaren. Anyways, it's just a random sidebar. But the interesting thing is for Jost, he seems to be getting those gains sooner than what McLaren did when they went through the restructure and Zach came in and Andreas came in. So is there some sort of stronger light at the end of this season tunnel for Jost and for these guys, and for potentially Oscar Piastri to come in and benefit from a driver like Nicholas GOATifi and Alex Albon really putting in the groundwork now? I
think they've had lots of turbulence, haven't they, in the last year? They've had, sales and management changes, and they've had lots of turbulence over the last maybe 3 years. Are we starting to see a settling down of structure and of finances and of operations? I think that's probably what we need to be asking, and they certainly have that in the drivers. They have consistent drivers. They have a great driver in Alex Albon. I think we just got to give that time to let all that noise and turbulence settle down, which it is doing. And I'm confident that they're going to be gradually just chipping away at and getting into Q2 quite consistently. I mean, you got to look at Haas and Haas were great this weekend, but had Albon's upgrades worked, or if Albon was on the same package as Nick, then they would certainly be battling the Haas's up there for a top 10 finish.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. It would have been interesting to see Alex Albon versus a sick Red Bull, let's just say, in Max Verstappen and what he could have done there. Let's talk about Aston Martin now, though, Richard, because it's been an interesting year for them. They are not doing nearly as good as they would have been expecting, I imagine, especially considering they're 9th in the championship on only 18 points. Seb Vettel managing some pretty decent performances when the car is speaking to him in the right language, and Lance Stroll having an interesting strategy of just staying out to see if a safety car ever happens, and sometimes it does and he gets good points and sometimes it doesn't, but he often finds himself in absolutely no man's land, like he did again this Grand Prix.
I think Seb Vettel, probably one of the greatest drivers, certainly of our generation, is clearly showing what the car, isn't capable of. And they've just got to work at it. I think they're one of these. I think next year they're going to be in a real strong position. Certainly with the sort of resource they've got now available to them. I think what they've got at the moment, they've got a very advanced car, and maybe they don't necessarily have the resource to extract the best from it. Maybe because they're still relatively a small team and constantly growing, and they're an amazing team actually. Some of the people are there are some of the brightest minds in F1 and have been there for many years and have certainly been around the paddock. There has been some, again, going back to this turbulence issue with management changes, with what's happened in the last couple of years, sponsorship changes, ownership changes, as well as having a completely new regulation change. I just think, again, it's time. I think it's time. And they've got this. I think they've got an amazing car, but whether or not they can match the extraction, because of their sort of stretched resources until they get up to speed with the rest of the teams. You know, are they going to be there or thereabouts? I certainly think the car doesn't justify, you know, Vettel's experience. But yeah, it's a tough one. Again, I think they're in this period of transition at the moment.
Yeah, they're not the only team,
No.
and that's the interesting thing, isn't it, about the mid pack and the bottom half of the mid pack. Haas absolutely seems like they're going in the different direction. I mean, it's sort of been a roller coaster for them this season. Freya so far, they've been up and then they've been very down. They've been very back towards the very back of the grid. Mick's crashed a couple of times. It's been an interesting ride for them, but a double points finish is fantastic for them this weekend. Mick Schumacher in 8th and Kevin Magnussen in 10th. Mick really putting it to Max Verstappen. In fact, there is an interview from a couple of years ago, well, it would have been many, many years ago, because Michael Schumacher is wearing Ferrari red, where he's talking with Jos Verstappen saying, wouldn't it be good, wouldn't it be interesting if our kids were racing each other? And there it did happen. So in the fields for that one. But for Haas, it's good. Gunther will be very, very pleased with that result. He's going to get to upgrade his Aldi boat catalogue picture again.
Yeah, go back to the last upgrade again for that catalogue, I think. But yeah, what a turnaround for them from, you know, Canada was a DNF and 17th to both being in the points, and Mick, of course, with his first points, which was just such a relief. You know, honestly, as much as it was a great race and lots of interesting things happened, there was also a lot of just relief involved between, you know, Sainz's maiden win and Mick getting his points. Just glad to see those things finally eventuate. And that battle between Mick and Verstappen, I think, was kind of interesting because it does show, I think, in a way, even with damage to the Red Bull, the performance difference between those cars. But it was great for Mick to have that opportunity to properly race. K-Mag had an interesting race as well, though. I think he was advised to pit but kind of decided to stay out, and he owned that decision as well. But yeah, happy with both to finish in the points. But I think, I'm not sure, they still didn't seem as competitive as others at points of the weekend. So I think the outcome overall is probably the best they could have done, and would be happy with it.
Yeah, Rich, they're running 8th in the championship so far, 7 points behind AlphaTauri. I think we were probably expecting a little bit more from Haas, more consistency at least from Haas, weren't we? Especially after the first couple of races. Kevin Magnussen comes back from IndyCar, from Chip Ganassi Racing, and jumps into this thing and sends it around the testing track around Bahrain. It all looked very good, and then had some issues. So is this another team that's in transition? Because if that's the case, it seems then the entire mid-pack probably is in transition.
I think Haas have got a nice little settler going on now. I think they did have a little bit of upset at the start of the season, obviously with the whole Russia thing, but I think they're in a good place to really sort of, you know, hone their Ferrari parents and gradually get up there. I think they're at the other side of that transition now, and I think they'll be back up to where they started the season. I think towards the end of the season, I think we can certainly see them having a good battle with AlphaTauri and Alfa Romeo, and I'm looking forward to that towards the end of the season. I think that would be great. I think they're doing a good job. They're doing a really good job, Haas, and I think Mick, for all his crashes and expense, is learning a lot from Kevin Magnussen. And I think they're both bouncing off each other. They're both very close, and they were running pretty much together for the entire race at Silverstone. So, yeah, I think they're on the up.
Yeah, and it's a good place to be. It was also interesting, Seb Vettel said that he was shouting in his car watching Mick and Verstappen battle, willing Mick to pass Max, which I think is fantastic. Daddy Seb, again, absolutely the content that we're here for. We need to talk about McLaren. As you said, Richard, I mean, Lando Norris was just on it all weekend. Absolutely no problems, it seemed, for him. For his McLaren, they're running 4th in the championship at the moment. There's a significant difference to 3rd, which is Mercedes on 204 points, McLaren 73. And a lot of those reasons, unfortunately, for me and for everyone else, is listeners and love this podcast, it's Daniel Ricciardo not getting it together, as we've spoken about before. But let's talk a little bit about Lando Norris, because he was really up there and holding on to some of those fights towards the front for a pretty significant amount of time, and doing things with that McLaren that really he didn't really have the pace that we thought he should be able to.
I thought he looked great. I thought he looked great all weekend. I thought he was, consistently, certainly in the top 6, there or thereabouts, holding on to the coattails of the top 3 teams. I think that's his natural position. His natural position is 7th. So to get anything above 7th is basically like a win, I think, for McLaren at the moment. You've got your top 6. You got your Ferraris, your Red Bulls, and your Mercedes, and if you can break that top 6, then I think you're onto a bit of a winner, and that's what Lando's continually doing. Yeah,
Freya, it's difficult to keep seeing the posts of it was tricky and this didn't work and that didn't work and there's an issue with this and all that sort of other stuff for DR. For qualifying, it was just purely wrong timing. He got out too late and the track didn't improve; it got worse, so he was never ever going to get further than he did. But we do have a couple of races coming up that he does like. He has performed pretty well in Austria in the past. It's where we're heading to. And then, of course, we've got the summer break, which did him wonders last year. He came back from the summer break and was able to sort of get it together. So potentially they're sort of a faster point to get to that point in the year, give himself a bit of a mental break, go back to the ranch in Texas, really download, ride some dirt bikes with some other Red Bull people and reset? Or do we think this is something that's going to be a little harder to overcome compared to last year?
I think what's interesting with his kind of comments so far to this point in the season is that he does seem to be in quite a different mindset in comparison to the same point last season. So same point last season, we were starting to see a really down Daniel Ricciardo. He wasn't wanting to do the media engagements after the race. Very much kind of wanting to get out of there as quickly as he could. And we're not seeing that at this point in this season. He does seem to be still a bit more, I suppose, upbeat and that type of thing. And so I'm not sure we're necessarily experiencing the same issues or situation necessarily. And whilst I still hope that time away has the same benefits as it did last year for him, I'm not sure that it's the same challenge that needs to be solved in comparison to last year. It is getting obviously really hard to watch as a Ricciardo fan. And I think what's challenging as well is after the race, you're expecting a statement along the lines of, we had to manage fuel, or I was told not to push because we were managing this part of the car, or we had a gearbox issue or something. You're kind of waiting for this reason, because I think we looked at the timings at one point and you're just going, he's 20 seconds behind the next car. I can't remember who it was at the time, but there's got to be something wrong in order to have that type of a performance gap, because Daniel Ricciardo did not forget how to drive overnight, and he won a race as recently as last year. So to me, those variables together doesn't equal Daniel's a terrible driver. There's more to it than that. He said after this race he was very confused by the car. He kind of compared it to Barcelona and what he experienced there, where he said, look, it's hard to put your finger on it, but something doesn't feel right, and we just don't know quite what that is, and whether that's his confidence in the car. But as long as he's saying that something doesn't feel right, he's not going to push it to right on the limit in the way that you'll see somebody who does have the confidence in their car doing. So I don't think it's a simple solution, but there's a lot of problem solving that kind of needs to be going on there to connect the dots with his performance.
He's a bit of a victim of this regulation change. This is it's a huge regulation change, and like we said last year, he won a race, but I mean, he was 2 seconds off Lando in the last 10 laps. 2 seconds off a lap. So maybe these regulations aren't helping him in some way, shape, or form to what he was used to. I don't know. Does he may feel that the car's too heavy for him, or maybe it's too I don't know. I don't know. I mean, we can say that, you know, the team have done everything they possibly can to get that car to be the best of the rest, and that was their target, and they're certainly breaking into that. Competing with the likes. Well, I think they're in their own little sort of area, aren't they? They're between Mercedes and the rest of the pack. They've got their own little sort of niche, but.
Yeah, it's very hard, very, very hard to watch. What I was going to say is that what he did do is leave Alpine, which probably wasn't the right call, but what it did mean is that this man came back, Fernando Alonso, who's just... you said, Freya, earlier on, we need someone to get behind. Latifi couldn't care less. This guy, though, Fernando Alonso, look at him. The youngster, the up-and-comer that he's here for. In fifth, just absolutely holding on to it. That little scrap towards the end between Lewis Hamilton, Sergio Perez, Charles Leclerc. There's Fernando Alonso just waiting for someone, the shark in the slightly deeper water, waiting for you to make that mistake by taking a step too far, and he would have absolutely taken it. He is driving the absolute wheels off this Alpine, Freya. It's unfortunate Esteban Ocon ended up rolling to a complete stop on the old straight, which caused the safety car, which was what everyone backed up, which was unfortunate for Charles Leclerc, which we'll talk about. But yeah, Nando just has so much pace, and the opposite of Daniel, has so much confidence in this Alpine.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredible to watch. And like you said, absolutely get around Fernando Alonso. And I know I mentioned this in my terrible voice notes that I sent through at Canada. Thank you for making me sound drunk on the podcast, by the way. But
you're welcome. Had absolutely no help from you.
But my goodness, so Richard, I was basically on that straight, watching them all come through near the finish line, and my goodness, watching the crowd just go wild for Nando, like chanting his name, absolutely loving him as a competitor. I was a little bit taken aback, to be honest. It's like, you obviously have your own opinions, and we love Nando, but then to be surrounded by people chanting his name, I was like, okay, I'm not alone here. This feels good. But he was fantastic this weekend, and he seemed pretty happy with fifth, and had a good race. He had a twinkle in his eye though, so even in his interviews afterwards, he was ready and waiting in case anything. Yeah, he really did. Just ready and waiting for something to happen ahead for him in order to take that opportunity if it presented itself. He loves getting in the mix of a good tangle, and I'm absolutely here for it. I think something to be said this weekend for Alpine was well done for getting Ocon's car back and ready for the restart. As well. That was exceptionally impressive to get him back and ready for that second go. And he had a good start when they had a second go at it, and he looked like he could potentially do all right. But then I think he had a fuel pump issue, and between that and the battery issue in qualifying, it would probably be pretty frustrating for him, I think, this weekend, because again, there's that opportunity there. He probably felt like it was possible this weekend to score some good points, and he just didn't have a great run of luck when it comes to a few issues with his car. But I think overall Alpine actually on the whole did pretty well.
Richard, it's interesting because he took time off and then came back to Formula One and now is having a good time. So there's potential there maybe for Daniel Ricciardo to take some time off and maybe come back. This is an idea I'm stealing from a fellow Australian podcast, Boxer Neutral. Shout out to you, Rob. Thanks for that. I'm just going to absolutely steal it and use it as my own. But go for a sabbatical for a year, take a year off and then come back where there's some more free seats. Whether he does that or not, it's very risky. For Fernando Alonso, though, Richard, it seems to have worked because he absolutely has his mojo back.
And Kimi as well. Kimi as well.
Indeed.
I mean, Fernando. But the thing is that, again, going back to the psychological aspect of this, what's he got left to prove apart from having an absolutely great time? And I think that's what he's doing. He's absolutely having the best time of his life right now. He's like you say, he's just beaming from ear to ear. You could see him in the background at some of the press conferences, waiting to be interviewed. Just not a bead of sweat on him. Height of physical fitness, smiling away. Really happy. Had a great battle. They brought some great upgrades to the track. I mean, basically they brought upgrades that they can just bolt straight on and are going to leave on. They know they work. They're very confident in what they brought, which is like a Ferrari style side pod. They know they've opened up the rear wing, and gives them a lot more confidence. And I think both Ocon. I mean, just before his incident, he was on fire too. He was great. Not literally, but he was great. Ocon was there and battling away, and Fernando was there as well. And again, a big shout out to Rob Cherry, who's the chief mechanic at Alpine, guy who I very much respect. I could see him there with his, basically sleeves rolled up, and he was getting involved in that suspension change during the red flag. A great job, and just shows you what those guys can do when the chips are down. So. Yeah, I mean, again, confidence, having that team around you, of a team of people like Rob and all those other people that give you that lift, and of course, nothing else to prove, just cracking on and just enjoying life and enjoying racing. It's shows you, you don't need the top cars to really enjoy a championship like he's enjoying.
It's really, really great to see, and we are loving the fact that he is putting in these performances so close to the front. It is great to see. Mercedes, speaking about being closer towards the front, apart from George Russell, who we've already discussed, Lewis Hamilton in third, absolutely the overtake or double overtake of the entire race weekend as far as I'm concerned. There were two errors by two other drivers, and he did the Fernando Alonso, as previously discussed, and was there to snap them up. So awesome to see, but then the big awesomeness of Ferrari and Red Bull's power and just advantages over the Mercedes were very clear in the following corners. But it's been a while since he's been on this podium. There's been a rough couple of weeks with stupid comments by people who, previously involved with Formula One. So for that to then come through and for him to get on the podium at the home Grand Prix, absolutely bloody fantastic. To the point where I was willing him onto the podium, which I don't think I've ever done that. I've been willing him off the podium so other people can get on there. That's how excited I was for him and for Mercedes to be making these steps, Richard.
Yeah, he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. And those two overtakes that you mentioned there around the outside, on two occasions he found grip out there. The only thing I would sort of say let Mercedes down this weekend was the fact they weren't watching Perez. I honestly don't think they were watching the silent assassin there creeping up behind them and just sort of, stealing everything in the last minute. They were too concentrated on Ferrari. And that's fair enough, because that's who they had to try and beat. But Perez, he was there. And I think they were all surprised at that, including Lewis. But Lewis was, showed his genius, showed his calm, his professionalism. Again, despite all the turbulence he's had in the last 2 weeks leading up to the British Grand Prix, where the press try and dig up, everything, and some of it not very nice at all. It just shows his professionalism and the fact that he can still jump in that car and be the absolute best he can be, and he is the best. He is the absolute best. I absolutely think him and that team work so well together that they, once they get on top of their that gap between them and Red Bull, I think Red Bull will be and probably should be getting worried for the second half of the season. But yeah, he's on form. He was absolutely on form.
The best Hamilton-Perez scenario wasn't actually them. It was their dads for the podium celebration, with Tom Cruise looking on like a loving father watching Daddy Perez give Daddy Hamilton a big kiss on the cheek. It's fantastic photos. Please go and check them out if you haven't seen them already. Phenomenal. But just the passion. This is a great thing. Seeing these drivers' dads embrace. I love it because Anthony Hamilton, outstanding influence for Lewis, it must be said, and certainly with what happened and transpired in Abu Dhabi last year, one of the things that sticks in my mind is him going up to Jos Verstappen and Max and shaking their hands and willing Lewis to do the good thing and the right thing by going out to shake Max's hand too. It has to be said that he is such a great influence, and I've said this before, Formula One drivers are leaders. But when you have influence like that in your life, it's bloody outstanding. And to see him so happy as well, it makes it all worthwhile. And it reminds you that they're just people, they're just human beings, and they travel in rocket ships, as you said, Richard, but it is good to see. But let's talk about Red Bull, because Max Verstappen, as I said, had this issue with his car and the silent assassin, which I love that. I'm going to use that from now on. Sergio Perez, second position. Unbelievable for him. He's currently second in the World Drivers' Championship at the moment. So there is still absolutely a chance that he could win this year if Red Bull let that happen with Max. But it's interesting, Richard, just the performance loss of Max's car. It almost just seemed immediate. The flaw clearly just that powerful.
Yeah. Well, he had a end plate of an Alfa Romeo. An Alfa Romeo stuck in the floor, a whole end plate. That basically, just completely ruined his chances. But I mean, still to finish where he finished, 7th. Again, second and a half down on the leaders, and still being able to make a race of it. Yeah, I mean, he was happy, wasn't he? At the end of the day, he knew that he had the pace in the car. He was happy for Sergio because, again, it showed the pace of the car. That is the benchmark, and I still think there is a massive gap now, a bigger gap between Red Bull and Ferrari, despite the Ferrari winning the race. I actually do think that Max would have romped home with it, to be honest with you. This weekend, just in speed and the ability of that car. So, yeah, Sergio Perez though. I wasn't even watching him. I was like, where the hell did he come from?
No.
All of a sudden, bang, he was there. Right, I'm just gonna use this car now and just do whatever I need to do to get up there. He was exceptional, and I think he actually won Driver of the Day. For him, it was him and Fernando.
Yeah, Freya, it's great to see where these second drivers, inverted commas, second drivers in the past have never really gained the attention they deserve. But as Richard said, Sergio absolutely deserves it, and he's incredibly quick, and he's showing it again. He's maybe found slight part of his mojo that he found in Monaco. Maybe he's got that back again, and certainly I would say with the performance this weekend against everyone, including Ferrari. Let's talk about Ferrari, because thank goodness, about bloody time, Carlos Sainz, A, pole position, I should say, and B, finally gets a win. Ferrari were going full Ferrari, though, Freya, with some of their suggestions on things that he should do to help Charles Leclerc.
I have so much to say about Ferrari this weekend. I'll probably only say about a third of it because we will be here all day or all night in your in your situation. But my goodness, that call, you've seen me watch races, just going absolutely wild, going absolutely not. And I was so glad that he was assertive in that moment. But do you know what is actually really interesting as well about Sainz? They came back out and they were asking him to keep the full 10 cars between him and Charles in order to give him a better opportunity to take the win. But what was really interesting, I thought, was how he responded in that moment. So yes, he was being assertive. He was saying, I don't want to do this. But you still hear a maturity in his voice of saying, please no, please no, we're not doing this, as opposed to getting some of those, what I'm going to call more childish kind of responses, which we have also heard on the radio in response to calls coming from the pit wall, which was just very interesting. Interestingly as well, though, I think you're right, Richard, Max probably would have completely dominated this race had he not had the damage that he did. Sainz still had quite a lot of understeer, which would have affected tyre wear, and funnily enough, he didn't actually look like it was one of his fastest races. But really, I think the blessing for Sainz was in the restart, because he kind of got a second chance. So much more assertive going into turn one in comparison to the original start for the race. He did have that mistake. I think it was at Beckett's maybe. It was kind of hard to see what happened, which then allowed for, who was it then still to come through? Must have been, was it Verstappen still? Yeah, he was still in the race at that point to come through. So at that point, I thought Max had it. I really did. And it just shows how those little moments, those small errors can have such a big impact on the race. Leclerc obviously disappointed with the outcome in terms of the decisions that were made. And in terms of not pitting Leclerc, I'm interested in your opinion on this, Richard, but I think everyone's initial instinct was, well, that was a terrible decision. They should have pitted Charles, but they made the point afterwards that, you know, that might then actually have influenced everybody else's pitting decisions. And and Mercedes would have probably left Hamilton out and then, you know, potentially lose the win for either of the Ferraris, and actually would have seen Hamilton potentially on the top place of the podium. But what were your thoughts when you saw that last safety car and they were just, everyone's trying to decide on what their strategy is?
Yeah, I mean, I can. My thoughts are always with the team and the strategists, that basically everybody looks at them. You know, the pressure that these team members on the pit wall and back at the factory to come up with a scenario that will work the best. It's not an easy decision, and it's not a snap decision. You know, we've seen from Mercedes, they make the biggest mistakes when they're put under certain levels of pressure like that, last minute pressure, pressurized, you know, safety cars and incidents that cause these sorts of decisions. So I'm always thinking about those people that absolutely get a sweat on when things like this happen, and they are really there to perform, and they do so at the highest level. So, you know, these are just people with data in front of them that help them make a decision, but ultimately it's them who do that, who make that call. And the teams have got to stand by that call, and the drivers have got to stand by that call. If it's the wrong decision, then they'll learn from it and they won't do it again, most likely. If it's the right decision, you know, let's learn from it and keep doing that thing right the next time. So, you know, I'm in no position, not being sat on the pit wall, to understand exactly what went on with those cars. But what I do know, and having been in a stack position, is that they would have ultimately made a decision that they, at the time, they thought was absolutely right for the championship, whether that be driver or team. And I don't think individual names came into that equation at the time. I think they just cracked on and did what they needed to do. And yeah, I think did they make the right decision? Probably not. But I mean, certainly for Carlos, it's worked out amazingly well. May have caused a little bit of a rift between the two, and Charles wasn't particularly happy. But again, you know, without all the people around him, and he sat in the car on his own, you know, it's difficult to judge from inside a car. You've got to trust your team, because 9 out of 10 times they will get it right.
And it's hard as well. Like we get those drivers' thoughts as soon as they come out off the track as well. They literally come out and they're basically still taking their helmets off and they're in front of a camera. And of course, your emotions are still running exceptionally high in those at that time. You know, they haven't had time to go and speak to the team, understand what went on, and then try and rationalize that and understand what the data was that was in front of them that then influenced that decision. So we're getting them right at that very raw moment, which is very hard to then obviously judge. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think we can finish this with a thought of Mattia Binotto giving Charles Leclerc a good telling off, a good pointing of a massive finger of saying, whatever you're going to say to the press, don't. Put it away. We'll talk about it later. Richard Saxby, thank you so much for joining us to debrief the British Grand Prix. Fantastic to have you on the program again so soon, and hopefully we can have you again at the end of this year.
Great, thanks again. I really enjoyed it, and let's see how the second half of the season pans out. Still a lot of races to go. Thanks very much, guys.
Well, it's Campy's favourite part of the podcast time. Let's get into our fantasy team name competition. Fantasy. And Freya, I have selected some of my faves from this week. Prepare for some lols. There is some here that I'm not going to read out. They're clever, but absolutely not for consumable content for anyone well, for a G-rated audience, I suppose. So thank you for changing them to these people. And if you're interested, go to our Fantasy League page. You can find the link in the description below to click through if you're not already there. We'll go to you, Steen, in first. Hamilton straight to the bin. That's very good by you, Sir Lewis Hamilton, straight to the bin. Campy's matching grey outfit, Byron H. Yep, you saw that. I had to see that in person for 2 whole episodes, and he was sitting right next to me, so that was very good. Well-heeled Englishman dothus indeed boo. Gemma C, very good point. There are absolutely boos going on for Max Verstappen, not, are they saying boo or boo earns, Crofty? Oh, they're saying boo earns. Samuel R, again, not saying that. Go and look at it. His first time signs his hair has looked bad. Karim K, I agree. He was so excited that he couldn't put all of his energy into his hair looking phenomenal. It was just, he had won the race, and that's just is what it is. 4 days of pure unadulterated, I'll try saying that at 12:39 a.m. UK bias, Kelly W. Yes, almost slightly like this podcast. Thanks to Saxby again for coming on. Ferrari Master Blan, IoT, yes, very good. Campy, Carnival, out of the bin you go, Daniel B. Yeah, that was a good episode. If you haven't listened to our Team Radio podcast, you can find that in our previous catalogue. LBS, say it with me, Q3 GOATifi, yes, must be very good at work for you for this week for him. He's okay, he was not okay, Daniel T. Yeah, Lando Norris getting booped in the face by Daniel Ricciardo, Freya, absolutely my favourite part
Best
of
moment
the weekend.
all season.
Oh, seriously. And just like the immediate regret on his face of like, oh, I'm so sorry. Please don't tell mum. It's exactly what happened. All right. Well, how about you read out your own, or you've just added it to the bottom of the note, and read out your own fantasy team name of which you cannot win this competition.
Super smooth, synchronized spinning. How's that?
There you go.
I'm surprised I got it again second time around.
Direct from... Yeah. Go direct from the US, according to F1 Fantasy. They don't acknowledge where you are. It's like, you must be in the US.
Because it doesn't exist.
I'm giving you.
This country's not real.
That's it. You don't exist. It's absolutely right. But what does exist is this podcast. Massive thank you to you for listening, subscribing, watching, whatever you're doing with this episode. We really appreciate it. Massive thank you again to Richard Saxby for joining us. It's so, so great that we're getting to chat to more people who have a better understanding of the world inside Formula One. But it is time to say goodbye. If you'd like to support the show, please do so by grabbing a t-shirt. You can find that in a link in the description below. We've got a new design up at the moment that won't last there forever. But Freya, we will be chatting hopefully in a couple of 7 days time now, or even less, because the Austrian Grand Prix is here. The Red Bull will probably dominate again, but it's all to come. A massive thank you to you as well, Freya, for joining us. And it is time though to say goodbye. We'll see you next time for our Austrian Grand Prix review. Mercedes a lot higher up there.
I've got every team on.
I would like
you're going to kick Campy out of the
like a visual representation of you like throwing each team away once you're done with them, moving on to the next one.
Outstanding. Outstanding content.